Hey, welcome. Thanks for joining our adrenal workshop. Robin and I are excited to kind of present to you guys a step-by-step, understandable approach to dealing with your adrenal fatigue. And again, if you're here, you already have an idea of what adrenal fatigue is. Yes. We have this long list of symptoms that you have, but you just don't know where to start.
So let's start with a real quick backstory. I'm going to tell my version of what exactly happened when we realized it was adrenal. Actually, we didn't know that it was adrenal fatigue, but the first big trigger that happened. So we were going, at the time, our oldest was 9 years old, which means our next one was 7, and then 4, and then a baby. And at the time, we were totally living not the shirts. We were living the norm. Our weekends revolved around our kids playing sports, and subconsciously, we didn't realize that we had a lot tied up in their performance, in them being included in these things. The whole sports with your kids, that's a huge adrenal stress, whether you realize it or not. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You just need to do some of these other things to balance it out, because it's tiring packing up and being on the field all day, and then you have the intensity of, you want to see my kids score or
be accepted, accepted.
And then you're talking to parents and you want to socialize, but at the same time you're like, I just worked so hard all week. I don't want to sit here and have this conversation. So we were at our son's flag football game, and he wasn't that good. I feel bad saying it, but he was really he was just so happy to have the snacks. And I'm telling you this because I know at the time, this was one of the triggers for Victor, although we didn't realize it then, but that at some level, Victor will talk about, you have this bucket and you can only hold so much in that bucket. And I think that being out in the sun, he was already tired, he'd been working really hard, he was overtraining, all these things we didn't realize. You hit that trigger, this made the bucket overflow. Danny, he just doesn't, he was quirky. He wasn't really into being competitive and being the best on the field. And I think something subconscious, because the more and more we study this, your subconscious really does influence the majority of your life.
Driving.
So we're driving back literally from the game, from his flag football game. And all of a sudden Victor's like, and grabs his neck and has to pull over. And you want to tell what that felt like?
Yeah, at the time, like Robin was saying, I did not necessarily feel stressed. I do remember at the time.
What did the actual?
Yeah, I was chronically tired, for what I felt overworked, tired. And then at the time, we were driving home, I started getting pain in my neck, usually do a little neck stretch, and it kind of sent a real zing, what I thought was like a pinched nerve. I trained pretty hard at the time, so I was thinking it was muscular. But it was followed by this huge wave of heat and nauseousness. Right. And then a little bit of a tense feeling where I had to pull off. And that's what I describe it now. It certainly changed and became more what I call prototypical of a panic attack as I started to.
And at the time, he had never had a panic attack. I had never heard of what a panic attack is. My brother, who's a firefighter, was like, No. Was like, that's a panic attack. I'm like, okay. Well, we didn't know any better.
So got out of the car, pull over real quick, got out of the car, ripped off my shirt. Oh man, I feel like I'm gonna throw up, Robin. She's like, hey, you okay? I'm like, hey, yeah, I don't know. I pulled a muscle, made me feel nauseous. Got back in the car, drove back home.
And then we really didn't think much of it. Just like, all right, you'll be fine. Get over it. The next day, you were at work.
Yeah, the next day, typical work, get up early, go stop by Starbucks, order my venti, start drinking my cup of coffee, get through about my third hour of work, and I start feeling like I'm throwing a heart palpitation. My heart would race, and I go, oh, that's kind of weird. I kind of just sit over by my desk while everyone's working out, just kind of breathe, goes away, go back, work with them 5 more minutes, happens again. By the third time, there's a client there that I go, I asked her, do you think you could take me to the ER? There's something going on. And I of course, I had no idea. Again, this is just the impacts of stress. Was I having a heart attack? Of course, I was like, well, I don't have left arm pain, healthy. Am I having a heart attack? Right?
Yeah, and you naturally your mind twofold. One, goes to worst case scenario, and two, assumes that the doctor's going to fix it. So part of what we're going to talk about in here is that, not that we don't want you, if you're having a heart attack, to go to the doctors. Of course we want you to. but we want you to also like be able to pick up on the signs of like, oh, maybe this is something else going on. I know this is very common for a lot of people to end up in the doctors because of it. They put you on a, in this case, ran blood work. They threw something on like, oh, your creatine level's high.
Do you take any supplements? And I go, well, I take some creatine. Oh, it's obviously too much for you. They take an EKG. My heart's fine. You're fine. You can go home.
But a lot of people end up on the holster,
a holder monitor.
A holder monitor, and to monitor your heart. And while that is, depending on your personality type, while that might be a good way to just check it off that there's nothing wrong, in some ways it's the worst thing because you're like, something doesn't feel right and the doctor can't fix it. And then you're in this limbo phase of like, what do I do? Who do I go to? There's no like actual answer. Well, we're going to try to give you some of the answers right here.
And remember, a doctor in general has a limited amount of time with you, and he's not going to get to know like, hey, is there something in your life right now that could be adding to this?
Did he ask you how many kids you had?
Yeah, no kids,
Did he ask
no
how
job,
many hours
no
do you work?
hours I work, what kind of training I do. First, they don't even know that. And so it doesn't paint them a picture. They're just dealing with the physical body. And from the beginning, I always knew that there was a connection when I was working with clients with the mind and body. And so, but working on myself, I didn't see it because I was so close to the problem. Okay.
So some of the things you're going to notice if you are getting these symptoms of adrenal exhaustion, whether it's you're throwing heart palps, whether you're having panic attacks, maybe you just feel so tired. So the other one is like before this happened, I'm pretty sure it was actually the morning that we went to that football game. We went for a run and I go, Victor, what is wrong? Why can't he's like jogging, like almost like walking. I'm like, what is going on? I was up all night with Jariah breastfeeding. I'm like, let's go, let's run. I only have 30 minutes before I got to feed him again. And he's like, I just don't know. I'm just so tired all the time. And before that, he was always having to take naps, especially by the end of the work week. And so I was just so frustrated, like, oh my goodness, I don't see you very much. And we have these 30 minutes together. What is going on? Again, it's overfilling his bucket because like, oh, I just disappointed my wife. Now I'm disappointed in my son's playing game. Now I'm throwing a heart palpitation. You could see how you spiral really quick into, oh my gosh, something's really wrong with me. So one of the things is if you're just tired all the time, a step further is you're wired and tired, meaning you're tired, but you just can't relax or you can't sleep deeply.
Right.
Some of the other symptoms, after that, I would not say Victor had it beforehand, but after going to the doctor, I think that triggered even more anxiety and depression. And
well, I think you start to get like that feeling that like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going to have another one of these panic attacks. And so you're always worrying about that because I'm like, it's sort of debilitating. At first, I remember watching Iron Man 3 and Robert Downey Jr. is having a panic. I'm like, I know he did a really good job with that scene because I remember going, oh my gosh, that's what it's like. Oh, just get away from me, just get away from me. And so those are a couple symptoms. I had chronic pains, night sweats were crazy, like GI distress.
Okay, let's talk about so you had chronic pain. We're talking like he worked out a lot and couldn't recover. We went to a couple weeks after that, we went to the Bay to play soccer with the kids and he's just running and he tore his calf muscle. Like injuries out of nowhere that you're like, how am I falling apart? That feeling of, it just didn't seem right. And I think they kind of built. It started with the anxiety and then because he couldn't relax, we got to a point where I was getting a massage and I asked the masseuse like, oh God, my husband's having trouble with like, she knew him. It's like, he's just having so much trouble with, he's so stressed, there's so much anxiety. And she said, oh, well, anxiety tends to be trauma linked. He should read Waking the Tiger. What's it called?
Waking the Tiger.
Waking the Tiger.
The somatic experience, yeah.
And so, see
and this will all be linked, guys. This will all be linked in
I preface this is because you see, we started with just, I'm running and I'm tired. And it quickly went to a panic attack and heart palps. And then in the ER. And then constant anxiety because you fear having a panic attack. And then like this wired and tired. So you start stacking. So wherever you are in that ladder, it's okay. But notice like you want to do something about it because you can easily stack so many that it becomes out of control. And that's what kind of happened for us. So he gets this book. I don't know any better. Honestly, I tell you with hesitancy, this book, you may or may not be in a position to address your trauma. I think what's really cool is it was when we were doing this, it was back in 2010. So 11 years ago, there was not much information. I'm going to tell you, there are so many amazing minds working on trauma.
Yeah.
Trauma wasn't even talked about a decade ago, and now it's like the forefront of consciousness and the evolution of the world right now. And so you have so many resources out there besides us that, I mean, we can definitely help you with this. But if you want somebody who's specific about trauma, I would honestly, for us, the book was the starting point, but I would have somebody who can walk you through this, because trauma, whether it's a big trauma or a small trauma, trauma is trauma, and it traps in your cells. And this is why I do so much with chakra healing, because it makes a difference. Like you end up with these crystallizations, and you have like basically blockages in your energy pathways. So your body is not going to work right if you have all these traumas that you're not breaking apart.
And let me interject a little bit. I think one of the biggest things that I've learned with trauma, regardless of who you are, is that it's a representation for you. And so in your mind, if you say it out loud, like, well, I didn't really have much. My dad was kind of a jerk. It doesn't matter. Like, if your body will internalize that as a massive trauma, because you'll see people that have gone through very little and they're scarred for life. Or, I have a sexual abuse in my history, and I can still like downplay that. Like, well, I know these people over here have been beaten and suffered through, and so it downplayed my trauma, but in the end, it was significant in my mind and needed to be dealt with. And how I developed as a person, that was compromised because of that trauma, and so I needed to heal that and deal with that. At the time, though, I will say this, it threw me into a full scale tailspin. And so you have to maybe dip your foot in that a little bit. Like, it could be a little bit of that. Talk to your spouse about it. You can talk. I did talk to a shrink at one point, but I have to say it made things worse at the time, because I was so low physically and emotionally. It just sent me into a tailspin.
And I'm not trying to say that you should not go through meds, but the problem was in our case, is that the shrink, so he read the book. It's like,
on
this
a plane
might be
to Hawaii
going on. And he read the book. This might be what's happening to me. And then that triggered internally a whole lot of emotions. So then he fell into a depression. And because he was depressed, another client's like, oh, talk to my shrink. And so at that point, he was already like emotionally
at my limit,
like drowning basically. Yeah. And so the shrink is like, here, let's throw a med on it. Well, you have to realize there might be a time and place for it to like get your head above water. But in this instance, it wasn't actually breaking down the root problem that we were dealing with. So it did send a whole lot of triggers. Now, we are going to say that from the starting point is that you can absolutely do this all without meds. If you choose to go meds, that's up to you. But personally, we do not think that is the best option, because it's going to not address what's really,
you might as
we're
well
going to give you the solutions right now.
Yeah.
You can do these solutions so easily with the right support team. Okay, because it really does make a difference. And just throwing, so you've already have this mountain of subconscious trauma, hurt, pain, and all that's going to happen with the meds is you're just going to put a wall around it and be like, oh, well, I don't have to go there now. Okay, and so we want to try to make that mountain a little bit flatter instead. And
exactly,
do you agree?
I would agree. Agree. The idea is to make it so that you're dealing with that now, and so you grow as a person and development. Figure out who you are. I mean, it's a pretty beautiful thing when I say it now. But I was obviously, how do I put this? I was a very compromised person living in a bubble of shielded myself. You could easily see that the job that I took, it aligned with me building up my protective force field around me. Like, the stronger I get, the least people can hurt me. And so, and then essentially too, also defending children and adults. And, I kind of created that. And ultimately I needed to go in there and be like, all right, let's deal with that. But I don't need to go you need to bounce and just swim in that, like, oh, I can't get out of it. What we need to do is like deal with that simultaneously with build yourself up so that you can approach it correctly.
I think the important part to remember is that we all have a subconscious, okay? Whether we realize it or not, we are all fighting certain subconscious beliefs and programming, no matter what. We will never escape it. The only thing
5
is
to 14, right?
We will bring if we bring the subconscious to the conscious, okay? I should use my whiteboard, but imagine right now, they always use this statistic, only 5% of your thoughts are conscious. 95 are under the surface, you don't know. But what if you bring 5% more to the surface and you realize, like, I'm a control freak. If I like go through my day and I go, oh wow, I'm not going to stop being a control freak, but at least I've become aware of like, wow, this is where you control how everything's organized in the kitchen and complain when somebody puts it back in the wrong spot. Well, we have thousands of those programmings going on. Can those be the foundation that you're struggling through that's causing adrenal? Yes, absolutely. In a very roundabout, broad, thank you, way that, so when he was feeling the worst, he first has a doctor who says like, okay, well, you're just a meathead. It's too much creatine. Cut your creatine. Okay, well, that doesn't do anything. Then it's like, well, you just need Xanax. Okay, well, he couldn't function and work with Xanax. Not to mention, he's like, well, this makes no sense. I'm not an anxious person.
Right.
Okay, now I'm on a depressant because somebody made me trigger a trauma and it's trying to get me to like just keep going into it. And it's like, wait. Not that there wasn't a time and place to go into it, but like you said, we needed someone to build him up. In the end, our system that we're going to show you is really what I think would have healed it from the get-go to begin with. And if you just start there and have a good support team that works you through all those elements, I think it makes a big difference.
You know, if I were to tell one story that associated with this is that I remember hearing a story about a gentleman that goes that, you know, the big part of climbing Everest is to do the whole trekking part where you're getting up there, you're getting to base camp, and you're having to make that trek because when you do it in that fashion, you've changed and you've learned. If you just take the helicopter to the top, well, you're an a-hole when you got there and you're an a-hole when you get back. You haven't learned anything. And so part of this journey on healing yourself is to go through that change. You can go to the top, right, and get meds or even like not deal with all of the facets of it, but then you haven't learned anything, right?
And then what's the big purpose? What's the whole point in the end? If like, Victor and I talk about this all the time because there's some parts of why he ended up going through it to begin with is part of it is like laid in the foundation of how you're wired or how you're brought up to begin with.
Sure.
We talked about this in another video. Like if you're wired or if you're taught that like, well, being anxious is normal, then you're not going to think like, well, I'm supposed to be anxious. But then I was looking at him, we're married and like, anxiety, I don't know anybody who's anxious. Like anxiety wasn't normal to me. And so it's whatever you're going to choose to be your normal. Like he's saying, if you want to finish that climb, and if you don't think that there's something greater for yourself, then that's okay too, right?
Sure,
but
sure.
As an empowerment coach, I'm going to be like, well, no, there's more to, like, you should be living your highest self. So
right.
Step one is identify stress, because when he went into the doctor, somebody should have said, first of all, they should have sat down before drawing blood, before all these other things, that said like, what's your day look like? What's your week look like? Oh, you have 4 kids. Oh, you have a newborn. Oh, you work 36 hours in a job that 36 hours in 3 days or whatever. It seems like you're always at work. They should have asked too, like, well, what are you eating? Doctors they have zero nutrition background. They don't understand the interaction, maybe more now, but
And at the beginning of this, and we'll get into when we get into nutrition, but like food allergies versus intolerance. Intolerance wasn't even a word.
Yeah, if you didn't have, back then, if you didn't have celiac, you don't have anything wrong with you.
Right.
And then they didn't ask either about like, well, what do you do for workouts? Because all of those things played a role. So one of our courses that we do, it's called, Gabby, our oldest daughter, has this Brainwave Mastery class. And she talks about how there's different brainwaves. Well, we tend to operate in beta all the time. Beta is like It's your stress.
Yeah,
it's your stress.
sort of fight or flighty.
This is your normal. If people think, well, I'm supposed to be like in beta all the time, most of us were raised that beta is good. Are you productive? Are you on a hamster wheel? Are you chasing your tail? All those things that you feel like
that's
that
the
you
grind.
described. Yes. Well, you need to stop. Step one, when his was really bad, we had to affect his schedule first. He couldn't keep going to work at 6 a.m. He needed his beauty rest.
Yeah, and a big part of adjusting the schedule was because my sleep was so erratic. Like I wasn't getting that restorative sleep, right? You know, in general, when you wake up in the morning, you have that get up, get a cup of coffee, and get to work. Well, that I was just dragging, even though I was having multiple ventis. Like I could not get my eyes open, so I had to reestablish circadian rhythm.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to do because, even though we're taught Ben Franklin, early to bed, early to rise, well, it's really hard for most people to get to bed early. And so what they end up doing is staying up late and then
Compensating, yeah.
And then they're like, well, I got to get up early. I got to be more productive, only to be just basically burying themselves deeper and deeper. So one of the things that we have a resource guide in here about Dr. Wilson's Adrenal Fatigue book. One of the first things that it said in there was to sleep in. Like you really should sleep in until about 8 o'clock. So if your first step, if you are really hurting with your adrenals, can you change your schedule so that you're sleeping in until 8 o'clock? 7 or 8
a.m. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know it's like, oh my gosh, but I have a job and I have to feed my family. Sometimes something has to give. And maybe you're going to have to do some of these other things that we list and then work on the sleep part. But you really do need to.
So at the time I was getting up about 5:15 to get to work at 6 with the commute and everything. And that extra amount of sleep got me to get.
I think it makes a huge difference. Yeah. Getting up at 5:30 versus 6:30 even, huge difference. I know for me, I've been very lucky. I'm not Jocko, but I've been very lucky that I've never had to get up to an alarm. I get up when I feel like it. And so like for me, 6:30 to 7 makes all the difference. But if I get up at 6, I was like, my brain doesn't function as well and everything else kind of falls apart. Breathe, breath work. Just breathing in your normal day can make a huge difference in your adrenal health.
Yeah, so just a quick little physiology about breath work and why we integrate it so much and how it's related to adrenal fatigue. So adrenal fatigue, you're stressed out, essentially your body and your potential mind. And so we have two different breathing patterns. And this shoulder breathing pattern is akin to, doing an intense workout, hands on the thighs. Oh, wow, that's amazing. Wow. And while it's okay when you're working out on a micro level, I find that the vast majority of people are doing this sort of breathing even while they're sitting at a computer. And so what that does is keep you in a fight or flight mode the entirety of your day. Then you're adding caffeine, you're adding a stressful job, a stressful relationship. Now you're getting a cascade of problems. And so the breath work is essentially to shift you from this sympathetic or fight or flight breathing pattern with the shoulders to more parasympathetic or diaphragmatic breathing pattern to help you first off relax and shift into parasympathetic, more relaxed breathing, and also gives you the ability to be mindful.
Which is number 3. Yeah, breath work. So you can choose whether you just consciously choose to move through your day, and as you're at a computer or you're driving or wherever you're doing, you're talking to your kids, you're making dinner, you just consciously become more aware of breathing and relaxing, or you need to make time for some yin yoga, doing more meditation, something
sitting in nature.
Whatever. That's a whole nother layer of
programming.
Each Enneagram tends to have a spot where they breathe best.
Yeah.
Okay? Reflecting. The stress is absolutely a reflection of what is going on the subconscious level of your brain. If we did not know nearly what we know now about this at the time, after that first panic attack, could Victor sat there and meditated and reflected on like, hey, is there something that might have just happened seeing my son on that football field that triggered something that
stress that I didn't like.
Yeah, and who knows? We can't say, but my assertive self would say like there's a good chance that in that moment he could have avoided everything going forward by just having the ability to catch the thought process that was driving that situation. Okay.
I would agree with that ultimately, but in the end, I now come through it the other side, and I have this huge understanding of, and I'm still learning myself. You can tell my wife would probably turn around and give you a look when I'm saying I'm still learning a little bit about myself and dealing with the emotions inside me, and so it's an ongoing process. But in the end, I think it made me a trainer on this other level because I was able to address and comfortable addressing these other issues in my clients.
Okay, so let's talk about food. Maybe start off with the intolerance versus allergies.
Okay, so celiacs is an example of a extreme food allergy that will send off a massive red flag when you go into the doctor. The problem is that allopathic medicine deals with red flags. Let's take, for example, I like to talk about testosterone. The average testosterone for a male my age can range from between 200 to 900 milligrams. The number doesn't matter per deciliter of blood, but 200 to 900 being the range. I think what it's important to understand is that that's a 700 range difference. And so a lot of people will, if you go and test it first, if you come out within that norm, like you're fine. Well, never having done blood work before, you don't know if there's any change. So maybe you were 700 and now you're 200. That's a problem. And so a lot of food allergies and intolerances are tested in the same manner. And this is why a lot of men eventually go in and go like, look, I don't feel good. And now hormone replacement therapy is so big because you can essentially go in like, look, I don't feel myself, I feel low. And you can get treated for hormone therapy. And that actually could be just adrenal fatigue. Actually, more often than not, I would agree, it's probably is that. So intolerances and allergies associated with adrenal fatigue are linked to one nasty little hormone. Actually, it's still essential, but it's rooted in our past, cortisol. And cortisol is essentially helps mobilize blood sugar in times of stress. So if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or a bear, your body says, we need blood sugar now, mobilize cortisol, let's use anything we got to get this guy some energy because we can't digest, we can't do anything. The problem with that is that it starts to break down the lining of your gut because it's a stress hormone. Because again, it's shunting from that area so that you mobilize from your muscles, a little bit of your fat, and suck in to create blood sugar. And what it starts to do is increase the permeability of your gut lining. Now, we usually have lining of our gut that's villi, just like my fingers. And as we produce more and more cortisol, it starts to flatten out that villi. So all of a sudden, you have no ridges for those food particles to be able to broken down to. And just like my fingers, it increases permeability there. And as that food passes through the gut lining, it ends up where? In the bloodstream. Food in the bloodstream, or in many cases, if you're talking about your lower GI, like your colon, poop in the bloodstream is not a good thing. The body has to mobilize to attack these particles. Voila, you have a perfect scenario for creating food intolerances that you've never had.
And what would be some of the things that people would experience?
All right.
If that was
so constant bloating, nothing agreeing with you.
food in the stool.
Food in the stool. Beyond that, generally this isn't. We always talk about getting uncomfortable with people. Like, look, you have to have a normal looking bowel movement, and most people know what that is, and actually feel what that is when that's correct. But you're going from constipation to diarrhea in the runs and food particles. You know you have intolerances, especially if that's chronic. IBS, colitis, all of these things I think can be potentially linked to adrenal issues.
And then that triggers an inflammation in the body.
Correct.
And inflammation in the body creates what causes what diseases?
Well, yes, could. Ultimately, the system goes this way, right? So now the food particles are there. The body says, dang it, we got this stuff here. Put out more cortisol. Let's increase the output. We got to deal with this. And you become more and more inflamed. Eventually, those little adrenal glands get so tired they can't produce enough, and inflammation goes haywire. Yeah. And do you want to go?
Well, I was going to say, and then we end up with that could be what happened to you 10 years ago and you let it go. 10 years later of inflammation can eventually be heart disease, diabetes.
Autoimmune issues, Hashimoto's, thyroid issues, all can potentially be linked to this inflammatory response in your body.
So we want to catch it now or we want to heal it now. I promise we're going to get to the ways to heal it. But one of the other things though is just gut health in dysbiosis, in the number of good bacteria. Like you want to have good, healthy bacteria in your gut. In fact, you have trillions of them.
So as this process that I just described occurs, and the permeability increases, that's when we start to see increasing growth of bad bacteria, in part because you're feeling so bad up here, you're like, you need something to pick you up. So you increase usually caffeine and sugars. And for a lot of people, increasing that process. So you're more addicted to sweets, which ultimately feeds the bad bacteria and they go nuts. And essentially they do end up controlling your mind in the end, because they, instead of responding to with your mind and being rational, like I need some healthy food, these bad bugs start to control, like send down more sugar. And the urge is so powerful that you can't fight it.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this is not a ladder. You absolutely could actually be starting here at the gut health part. It's not always food intolerance first. You could be, you're busy. Your lifestyle's so busy, you're eating on the run. And so you're going to reach for a bag of chips, or you reach for that candy bar, or you're reaching for something
quick,
sugary that feeds bad bacteria, and that feeds it more and feeds it more. And eventually just feeding that more can lead to the intolerances,
correct,
which could create the stress response.
It's all connected. It's all connected.
That's where we're like, it doesn't matter in the end, at the end of this, I promise, it doesn't matter if it's the chicken or the egg, we're just trying to lay, or egg.
Have an understanding.
Chicken, just understand the big picture. Blood sugar regulation now becomes huge.
So we talked about that nasty little hormone cortisol and the importance of what it does for you in a fight or flight response. So you can imagine if it's being put out in high levels, you're going to have trouble managing your blood sugar because your body's assimilating it. At the time, I could not control my blood sugar, even being very efficient when what I was eating. As a matter of fact, I get so hangry, I'd come home and just devour food to try to get it to respond back. And I was always having a struggle with that up-down motion. Again, caffeine and sugars.
If you've ever had low blood sugars, you got a couple issues with this. Is like, some people think of low blood sugar and they're like, just think of getting hangry, and that's kind of easy to see. But what happens if you leave that too long, you end up with metabolic syndrome, the other end, where you don't even notice, right? That you're like,
Now, if you have severe symptoms, like I could see how this could be exacerbated by someone already going in with type 2 diabetes. Right?
Absolutely.
And so you already have essentially a blood sugar management issue. And so taking care of all these other things like we talked about, you better be on your game. Otherwise, you're already shifting the odds in the favor of staying ill or in disease.
Absolutely. All right. So with that comes the right type of exercise. So
exercise becomes a critical component. Being a strength and conditioning guy, I can tell you at the time when it was going on, I had probably a decade of workouts all written down. If it was Monday, I was benching. And if it was benching, I better be hitting a rep PR, some kind of PR. I was amazing at programming, still actually enjoy programming a ton with my clients, but a whole different way now with having an understanding of adrenal stress and with their grand scheme of things, their big goals, right? So exercise is a fancy word. In college, we don't call it exercises. We call it work. Work equals force times distance, not exercise equals force times distance. And so essentially for the body, it can be perceived as another stress, right?
Exercise is such a broad, that's like saying, okay, I want you to eat food
So
today.
you agree with me, right? Ultimately,
it's
work,
totally
stress, yeah.
We have this mindset of thinking, well, I need food. And maybe we even have this mindset that we're supposed to eat 3 times a day. I don't know why we're supposed to eat 3 times a day, but that's what we are taught. So that's what we do. Well, exercise, it could mean different thing to you. To Victor, it meant I lift heavy weights every day. And right now, to me, exercise means I get out in nature. I don't care if it's a hike or a bike or
rock
climbing. Everything.
Sure.
Exercises means a lot of different things. And we're not here to say what it needs to mean for you, but what it does need to do is be intuitive. Exercise should serve a higher health and wellness. Physically, whatever that exercise is going to do to make you feel physically better, and Victor always uses the term train, don't drain. Because of our adrenal exhaustion experience, he learned that he couldn't keep draining the system. Exercise should be something that empowers you to live a better life, to make it so that you can go do other things. Exercise as its highest goal, well, maybe if you're a professional athlete, but I bet you even professional athletes want connection with loved ones. They have all these other things that they're trying to build. So it's really important that you're exercising in a way that aligns with a bigger point of living.
Right. So think of it this way: when you're thinking of exercise in your body, it's like a bank account. You want to be putting money in, right, to build it up. If you're constantly withdrawing or draining yourself, you're going to end up essentially in the hospital if you're draining. This is why a lot of people strive. I wasn't ever a massive fan of CrossFit. I was actually more angry at the ability for them to market it that I didn't jump on. But ultimately, it's high intensity interval training. And yes, it can create results in certain people, both positive and negative. And even people that with severe adrenal fatigue, initially they'll get this huge, like, wow, my gosh, I lost like 7 pounds. And then the wheels fall off. And so it's real critical to understand that. And so if you're in severe adrenal fatigue, it's absolutely important, like Robin says, that you have an intuitive nature to your exercise so that it's making you feel like it's building up. I still walk in the gym because it makes me feel like that. If that's not you, then you don't even need to be in the gym. Actually, most of my clients that I work with now, to have a little TRX, an X ball, a couple kettlebells, and they get the results that they want. Yeah. And so that becomes critical. And so if you're a cyclist and you love cycling, yes, you can go cycling. Of course, you shouldn't go race intensely if you have severe adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
There's a sweet spot.
So we talk about a lot of two things. One, play is really important. So exercise doesn't always need to be traditional exercise. Mm-hmm. Exercise should be something that, like he said, isn't work. It's play. It's fun. You enjoy it. And that's really important for, you wouldn't believe how much it'll do for your stress levels in just doing something that you lose yourself in. That's you're not monitoring, you're not tracking, you're not worried about achievement. So that is a huge part. The other part is like, don't just credit that yoga, if you're not sweating or you're not in pain, that it's not exercise. There are entire cultures that just purely walk for exercise or move through the day. The problem is that, remember, we look at our schedule. Our schedule is very stress driven. We tend to be sedentary. So exercise really can be reframed to intuitive movement.
Absolutely, absolutely. And at the time, I will tell you, as a personal reflection, I hated the fact that I needed to water down my intensity because I was addicted to that intensity because that's the only time I felt good, because it could put off norepinephrine. It gave me that surge. But about a half hour after the workout, I came down hard. Blood sugar management was struggling. So find out what's intuitive. In general, nice and easy and enjoyable. You know, I get a lot of people that tell me that, hey, shouldn't I run to lose weight or shouldn't I run to recover from this? I'm like, well, how much do you really like running? I had one individual, it's like, I really hate to do cardio. I'm like, well, you're an ex-soccer player. Why don't you just dribble the ball around a grass at a park? He's like, that can work. Yeah, it'll work. Does it put a smile on your face? Yes. Does it elevate the heart rate gently? Yes. Okay, do that.
Okay, so we're just going to touch real quick on supplements are really your answer if you don't want to have to go the med route. And keep in mind, I'll go a step further because this is just what I do. If you go the med route, you're not necessarily going to you're going to get yourself out of temporary relief or get temporary relief and stop the bleeding, but that is not necessarily going to get you to your higher self. And remember,
you know, one of the biggest challenges I see with people is they tell me they might be on an antidepressant, and then they have to, and when they commit to go doing that, they also is a challenge of potentially ever going off of them. Right? It creates this whole like, oh my gosh, what happens if I go off and I create this? And that's why when I started, what was I on it? 2 weeks, 3 weeks? About a month. And I was like, I need to get off this now because I know it's going to be the longer I wait, the harder it is. I wanted to get off.
And honestly, because I would see in it, I'm like, this isn't actually helping you that much. Yeah. Like this isn't, I have this weird ability to see something in front of me and be like, okay, well, this is going to mean this in 6 months or a year or 5 years. And so thinking like, gosh, sure, this is helping today, but like, what's the long-term, what's the greater goal? What's the purpose in life? And that's a really important part. We're not even going to touch on really in here, but if you can see your staircase, your
Yeah.
journey, your highs, like what, yeah, I know right now today you're like, oh, I just don't want to be tired. I don't want to need to reach for caffeine all day. I don't want to have low blood sugar. I don't want my wife to yell at me. I don't want to, I want to go to the bathroom and not see my food, whatever it is.
I want to get lean again at
Like-
that time.
I was going to add one more thing, but
No,
we'll keep
no.
it. But it's like, yes, see that. See what you want to avoid and get out of, and also see like what would be that win? What would be the like, heck yeah, that I want in life after
We need
that?
more of those heck yeahs, especially when you're in that place, because in order to get out of that hole,
Yeah.
you need to have that extrinsic motivation.
So we're not going to go through all the supplements in the, you know, if you work with Victor in coaching, he'll like take you through which ones to start when and how to do it. But one of the things is that we can work on the adrenals from a very simple level. Vitamin, I know this is crazy, it's super expensive. Vitamin C. This is the one trick that Victor always has people do. If
see.
you have, this is a really good indicator. Take those emergency packets and
32,000.
have one at each meal, because you probably eat 3 meals a day for now until you work with us later, and then you won't eat 3 meals a day. You're going to take at least 3, if not up to 5.
Yeah, I've had some people take up to 5 to kind of run the experiment over a week's period. And so one of the simple things is that people come in with severe aches and pains and low energy. For me to get an idea, vitamin C does a tremendous job. Obviously, we know the link to immune function, but it also helps blood sugar management. And if you remember up here, we were talking about that.
It literally is a superpower, though, for your adrenals. If you read Dr. Wilson's book, like his big thing is like, vitamin C is like what boosts your adrenals up.
Correct. And then the other thing is that there's a link between your adrenal and the referred aches and pains in the low back, right? And so I've had a few people come in and they have issues with their low back, and I do all the physical therapy and they don't seem to test for adrenal stress and they don't seem to be extremely stressed out. But then I run the test and I have them increase it. Like, hey, let's start off with 3,000 for the first couple of days, then take it up to 4, then take it up to 5. I've had people up to 7 milligrams of vitamin C over a 7-day period. And how about that?
7,000 milligrams.
7,000 milligrams at their 7th day. So building up, and then go into that for about a week, and all of a sudden their aches and pains go down, their blood sugar management, weight starts to come off. I'm like, all right, we got to treat you for some adrenal fatigue.
Yeah, and then, while that's a really great start, there's a lot of other things we need to do, like glandulars, depending how in the hole you are, glandulars can help. Another one.
A little note on glandulars while she writes the next one. Like heals like in nature. Like heals like in nature. And so what this means is adrenal complexes from bovine. And so what does that mean? You're eating the adrenal glands from a cow in a capsulized form.
It's funny, it was so hard to get back then. Now it's super easy.
Yeah.
Things that will boost your sleep are really important, because we talked about stress, that you got to get that circadian rhythm. So do things, there's a ton of supplements that you can do to get your sleep on track. I don't recommend, Unisom or things like that or Benadryl that you'll be addicted to. There are plenty of natural ways. The simplest one would be to start with a little bit of melatonin, but you also don't want to be addicted to that for long term. So.
Really love the night packs from Onnit. They sell an amazing product that I have. Gosh, half my clients right now have already shifted to taking Total Human. Their nighttime supplement has krill and their calm amongst the two big things. Their calm essentially has some melatonin, valerian root, and chamomile in it, all of which are completely natural, and they have the neurotransmitters to help you kind of calm down in the evening. And all of my clients love it and helps them calm down and naturally get into an amazing sleep state.
All right, and then so in addition to Onnit's Total Human, or in that also they have a gut health part. In addition, Onnit sells its own gut health one, so if you get the Total Human, that's great, but another would be also to add their gut health one. So then number 5, the last one would be, I'm gonna put trauma. I put trauma, but we talked about it. You don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far. So what I would recommend as far as that is to start with just an easy meditation practice. Just start paying attention to maybe what that dialogue's going on.
Yeah, dial in to sit in some silence and figure out what's going on inside and what things come up. These days, I coach most of my clients to some type of MFR and some meditation at the end. And then I have them, after we hang up, like, hey, go journal and write down what we talk about. And I always tell them, don't freak out about whatever you're thinking. Take it as a cloud, let it pass, but refer to it later. And so by doing that, it might conjure up some images and you're like, okay, just annotate that and like, okay, I know personally I have to go, oh, I'm doing that thing where I'm that scared little kid again. I absolutely have to do that.
All right, so we gave you a starting point. The next step from here is we have a link below. You can grab our course where we list exactly what all of these things are. You totally can do it on your own. The hard thing is that it's a lot of books to read and it's a lot of trying to figure out and piece together. I know I spent thousands of hours trying to piece together how to
systemize
this.
it, yeah.
The other way is you can work, Victor, a month. Most people in a month will see a
Yeah, if you want to jump
change.
in 2 feet and make that change and you're ready, that's the big thing. This is absolutely the big thing. I have multiple people that have reached out to me, and one of the big reasons I don't take a client on that first day is because I want to know, I can hear it in their voice if they're ready to go in. As soon as I say, oh, you need to readjust your schedule, well, I can't do that. I'm like, okay, well then you're not ready.
I think that one, and I think the others reflect. A lot of us are really fear what's going on inside. And unfortunately, we can tell you exactly the exercise, tell you the supplement, eat these foods, and you will make some progress. But if you want to like really propel yourself out of it so you're not cycling back in,
right? It's
and
steep.
out.
And so a lot of times I always see people lose that momentum and fall back down. And in order to get to that top, it is like a top of a plateau. To get to the top of that plateau, you got to keep someone that holds you accountable. And certainly that's one of the things that I do by daily, like, what'd you eat? What you doing? Let's talk. Let's stay with it.
It does make a difference. It's really like the little check-ins day in and day out are really what keep us, because otherwise, think about it, you're so busy, you forget a week later, like, oh man, what did I eat again that last week? How was my stress level? Victor used to always tell people, so how's your stress?
It's good. It's good. How's your eating? Good. Good. Now I need to know more.
All right, I think that
that'll get you guys a
really
good start.
Good start on.
If you're hurting, send me a message, guys.